Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to give it a few minutes while folks join, but thank you for joining us for today's cafe. Well, let's give it maybe one more minute. It's slowed, but we have a lot signed up for this. We have 107 on the registration list, so I don't want to start too soon. Let's give it one more minute and then we can get started.
I think we can get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ted Hafner, and I'm going to be co-hosting this cafe with you today. I'm the coordinator for the Green Vision initiatives for Chicago Wilderness Alliance, and I'll be giving you a quick 5-minute context about Chicago Wilderness Alliance before Tim and Bob take it over to talk about looking ahead and acting today for regional agriculture. As always, we are pleased to present these cafes. They are sponsored by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Forest Service. These cafes help communities improve urban tree canopy forest and across the region. As well as through participating in Tree City USA. And we greatly thank our sponsors for these lunch and learn cafes. Next slide, please. So Chicago Wilderness Alliance Green Vision sees a region, parts of 4-state region, which I'll get into in a second, with diverse members that work together for regional and vibrant nature, for human health, environmental health, promoting better quality of life, clean air, clean water, and clean food today and for generations to come. Go ahead, next slide, please, Lake. So Chicago wilderness geography is illustrated two ways here. The image on the right is a nice illustrative of this web of green in the southeast, Wisconsin, northeast Illinois, southwest or northwest Michigan, and southwest Michigan and northwest Indiana, rimming Lake Michigan. So what does that add up to in our region? Parts of 4 states, 38 counties, over 550 cities and municipalities, 11 million people, and over just about 8 million acres, 4.4 of which are agriculturally based. Next slide, please, Lake. So what is Chicago Wilderness Alliance? We are a network of over 330 partners that are mostly concerned with environmental and ecological issues in the Chicago Wilderness, Lake Michigan, Southern End region. We are all volunteers, with the exception of Laura, our fearless leader, and Lake, who do the bulk of the work for the Alliance. But we work as a network. We have a network mindset. We are adaptive. We are growth minded. And we use our collective power to get work done and support each other in this region. Next slide, please. And to help do that, we have 7 different goal teams, each with a different topic. Most of these goal teams interact, they overlap in theme and topic. So we have managing healthy landscapes as the first team, growing with ag as the second team, prioritizing green infrastructure, protecting landscapes for biodiversity conservation, increasing equitable access to nature, taking climate action, and protecting healthy waters. So you can see by the goal team names what topic each one is what each one works on. Sorry, I'm not having my best day here. And then the image on the left is just an illustrative of the climate team, and it shows how all our goals react and tie into the different goal teams. So for climate, we have adaptation mitigation goals, justice goals, advocacy goals, and education goals, and you can see which teams align with which goals by the dots and the color above. So as a Green Vision coordinator, I work to coordinate all the groups, find out where the synergies are, and bring them and bubble them up. And sometimes they result in cafes like this. Sometimes they result in actual projects. But that's what we do in the region. And with that simple explanation, I will turn it over to Tim, because Tim and Bob are the folks that you really came to see now that we got who Chicago Wilderness Alliance is out of the way. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you so much, Ted. Thanks everybody for joining. Just a quick introduction. I am Vice President of Programs and Strategic Impact at an organization called Farm Foundation. We were founded here in Chicago back in 1933. So for 92 years, we have been working on farming issues and issues of rural redevelopment and rural growth. We are a nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and we work across a variety of different things. I myself live in the town of Crete in Will County. I have a small hobby farm where I experiment with native crops that I find interesting, like hazelnuts and pawpaws. But I grew up on a farm in Northeastern Ohio, which is a really special region of the Great Lakes where you're able to grow all sorts of interesting crops. My parents were very early adopters of organics, and so we had an organic farm in the 1970s and 80s until I went to college. But like most kids who grew up in the 80s on farms, We grew up in an era where there was no future in farming. So I did not grow up to become a farmer, even though that's all I ever wanted in my life. But because of economic conditions not dissimilar to today, farming really collapsed, particularly in the Great Lakes region. My uncles lost their dairy farm. My grandparents stopped farming. Most people I know around us, farms condensed. They got a lot larger. Commodity crops became the priority. It was less about feeding their communities and more about feeding the export system, and it has grown into what we see today. And I will say, as a disclaimer, everything I will present today is really my observations, my opinions, information I've gotten from other sources. This is not a Farm Foundation presentation, but really it's aligned with the work that we're doing at Chicago Wilderness to try and build a better system for both nature and humans, all for the benefit of all of us, all the systems that support us. I'm particularly focusing on the Great Lakes region because I do feel the Great Lakes region is going to become one of the most important growing regions in the United States, if not the world, over the next 2 decades. We have tended to speak about the effects of climate change and trade and population in terms of 2050 or 2075, but I will show you today the effects of all those things are really here and now, and they're already manifesting in a wide varieties of ways that some of you may recognize and some of you may be surprised by some of the things that are happening, but all of it to me paints a picture of urgency, and the urgency is that we collectively as the the Great Lakes region and the individual states must take collective action to plan for the rapid changes that are taking place that are going to have a significant effect on our quality of life in this region. Next slide, please. Just some basics about Great Lake agriculture. This is the watershed itself spans a tremendous area, 94,000 square miles. Of course, we know Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan the most, but of course there's New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Quebec, Ontario, many other areas that border the Great Lakes or benefit from a Great Lakes watershed, including the state of Iowa. We have been an agricultural powerhouse since the early 19th century. Cheese production, you might be surprised to know, really was the driver of Ohio as an economic driver that created Ohio as a state. It was a dairy region, and really up until the 1980s maintained that. We're now a powerhouse, of course, in growing corn, soy, and to a lesser extent wheat. We account for about 15% of dairy production in the United States, but regional sales in this area are $1.5 billion annually. And I've seen different numbers on that. I'm just going on basic sales. I'm not going on trade value or anything like that. This was a region that produced a tremendous amount of variety of crops up until the 1970s. Most of these states were pretty diverse crop production areas. There are a lot of microclimates that the Great Lakes create, such as the area I grew up in Northeastern Ohio, which was, as I mentioned, dairy. It was also a tremendous apple producing region and is still a really important grape growing region. So if you ever have Welch's or Smucker's grape, that comes primarily from the county that I grew up in because of those microclimates. But also this area, particularly Michigan and Pennsylvania, producing things like asparagus, sugar beets, potatoes. I will often brag to my family back home, there is nothing I can't grow here in the great state of Illinois. I can go out anywhere on my property, dig a hole with my hand and plant just about anything and it will grow. We have the benefit of beautiful deep topsoil, and for the most part, it is rock free. And because of changes in climate, you know, I don't know if any of you live near farmland, but you'd be surprised to know that most of the planting in the state of Illinois is done already. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would not be done until early June. Next slide, please. So one area that's really important is to understand population shifts. This has been something that has been going on, obviously, through the 20th century and the early 21st century. But we really moved from a sustenance farming system where most farms were just simply existing to trade enough that they could sustain their family, but also growing food for their neighbors and perhaps or themselves, perhaps growing for neighbors, perhaps growing for sale in local markets. This, of course, became a commodity system primarily in the 1970s because of mechanization, chemicalization, and trade opening across the world. Farmers themselves were key players in opening new markets. Farmers in the 1990s were really responsible for opening and building trade relationships with China, which really brought this vision that former Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz had the vision of planting hedgerow to hedgerow, and we even tore down the hedgerows in order to plant more. But it really created the system that we live in today. And then COVID came along, and what COVID taught us, particularly in large urban areas like Chicago, is that we don't grow food to feed our local population. We grow food primarily for export, primarily ingredients or animal feed or fuel. We did not have access here locally, for the most part, to fresh, affordable fruits and vegetables because they're simply not grown at any real scale in this region. Just north of me is the town of South Holland. South Holland used to be the vegetable garden for the city of Chicago. It was the place where most of the farmers markets, most of the places that restaurants, institutions bought food from was grown in South Holland. South Holland, for the most part, no longer produces those crops. Now we sort of add to these population shifts and other shifts to weather. Weather has become much more intense. It has become, rather than sort of just a weather situation, they become weather events. Rain is fast and hard and strong and damaging. It is whisking away our topsoil, or we have extreme drought situations. If you recall, last year we had dust storms in central Illinois that caused highways to be closed down and people being injured in accidents because as they were driving, they suddenly could no longer see. These are situations we have not seen since the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. Now, there's an upside to this. Climate change is also enabling areas like the Great Lakes to have longer growing seasons. We have already changed our growing zones in this area. Thank you so much for moving on for me. That's good. No, keep moving. That's good. We're now able to grow things here that we weren't able to grow just 25 years ago. And what we're anticipating is this is going to increase north of us, but it's going to stay pretty stable in this region. The people that are going to lose are the people of Texas, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, California. Most of the western states are going to get hotter and hotter. There are parts of Texas, such as Brownsville, Texas, which is a major cattle producing region, that are struggling to produce cattle because it's simply too hot. And too much heat often comes along with not enough water. And that's the situation that a lot of these folks are finding themselves in. So this map comes from NASA, who's doing, I think, some of the most cutting edge and interesting mapping predictions on how climate will change, how crop production will change over the next 50 years or so. But we're really, they're expecting by the end of this century to see a 6 to 11% increase in temperatures. Just 25 years from now, 3 to 6 degrees. That has a massive impact on farming in a region like this. Next slide, please. One good example of this is looking at corn yield. Corn is a crop that not only thrives in heat and humidity, but it makes its own heat and humidity. There are studies that show that when corn is growing, and it's growing by inches every day in the state of Illinois, it actually raises the temperature here in the state of Illinois. But this is a prediction of what corn production will look like in 2070. And where you see the green zones, that's where corn could be grown. All the other zones, very unlikely that corn production will be in those places. That really creates a potentially disastrous future. Corn, as you know, is used not just for human food, but for animal food, for fuel, for a variety of things. Corn is the #1 crop in Illinois. We're the largest corn producer in the United States. However, corn is no longer the #1 crop of the world coming from the United States. Brazil now produces more corn than the United States. They also produce more soybeans than the United States. They're able to grow 2 crops a year. And so if you look at some of these shifts, Brazil comes out ahead even in corn production. And then we see Africa entering the fold. And I think some of this too will be the role that China is playing in agricultural production in Africa. They're making tremendous investments in the future of ag in China and are focusing on these areas where they'll be able to grow food 50 years from now. Next slide, please. So what we're facing here is obviously longer but much less predictable growing seasons. In the farm world study weather reports, we try to trust our Tom Skilling as much as we possibly could, but there really is no way of predicting some of this weather because it is so drastic. There, of course, is the increased risk of heat stress both on animals and on crops. I mentioned the inconsistent and destructive weather events. Increased weather and instability also encourages more disease, more pests, and as temperatures rise, we have more invasive species, both plants and animals and insects coming into these areas. Now, as I said, there's always an opportunity for each of these things. There are opportunities for new crops, new crop varieties, but there's also just a tremendous amount of global competition that this pushes us into. Next slide, please. One thing that's super important here in the Great Lakes region is our soil. We have, I'd say, not been kind to our soil. We have taken for granted the deep, rich soil, mineral-rich soil left behind by the last glacier. We have allowed it to be washed away, to be blown away, and it is something that is not easily replenishable. It can take up to 100 years to create 1 inch of new topsoil. We are focusing and have focused over the last 30 years in the farm world on soil health practices such as cover crops. But with weather damage as it is, and the changes in moisture, the inconsistency, that has a big effect on soil health and the ability of soil to retain moisture and to retain minerals. And I would prioritize soil health as probably the most urgent issue we have in the Great Lakes region today. We have got to protect the wonderful soil that we still have left. Next slide, please. So what are the economic consequences of all of these changes? Obviously, what we're seeing right now, both from the climate change perspective, but also the global changes, the things that President Trump is sort of causing at this point, I see as only of an acceleration of what has been coming for a long time. China has been searching for economic independence with their agriculture. They're investing trillions of dollars to restore their own soil. Excuse me. There are lots of changes happening in places like Europe. Their new Green Deal that is changing the way that they will accept imports into their countries. So in other words, there's been a lot happening before the new Trump administration came on, but obviously he has accelerated these changes to the point where I think a lot of them are a point of no return. I believe that a lot of economists, when they say that, and sociologists too, say that when China moves on from trading with the United States, they can't be brought back. They are intentionally moving on. They're investing in infrastructure in South America and Africa. They are one of our most important trade partners, but our 2 biggest trade partners are Canada and Mexico. Canada will become an increasingly major partner in the United States in feeding the United States. And so I worry a lot about damaging that relationship with them. Mexico is a huge customer of the United States. Because of climate change, they're not able to produce as much of the crops as they rely on, such as tomatoes. Tomato production shifted to Mexico about 15, 20 years ago. It's now shifting back to the United States because of drought and climate change. But just across the board, we're seeing decreasing yields, yet soaring land costs. There's a lot of people that are buying land as investments. The largest landholders in the United States are farmland holders. So the Church of Latter-day Saints, they own more farmland. Bill Gates owns more farmland. The average acre of farmland here in Illinois is almost $20,000 an acre. Back in the 1980s, I think it was something like $1,700 an acre. It's a remarkable growth. Lots of people are buying it simply based on spec. What I think we're going to see happen over the next 5 years is we're going to see the middle drop out of agriculture. I think a lot of farms that are big are just going to get bigger. So here in Illinois, a big farm is about 5,000 acres. We don't have a lot at the 10,000 acre level, but I think we're going to grow to that. And I think those 5 to 10 to 20,000 acre farms are the ones that are going to be producing food for animals, consumption, and energy. I think energy will be a primary driver of crop production at that scale here in Illinois. And I think that the other end is the opportunity end, and that's the opportunity for small farmers to produce things like specialty crops, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts that we're not going to be able to import from California or Arizona or Texas or any of these other southern states. So I think there's optimism at the bottom, but it's the middle. You simply can't compete or will not be able to compete if you're farming 1,200 acres of corn and soy here in the state of Illinois. Over the next few years, I think those farms are in big trouble. There's also a lot of competition for farmland here because of climate migration. We have lots of folks moving to the Great Lakes states, moving to Illinois because of climate change in their current home location, and housing competition for warehousing, energy production. We lose farmland here in Will County to solar farms pretty frequently these days. And that's a big concern. Anytime we're losing land in this region, it is a cautionary note for the future. That land is going to be vital to us to feed our population. And by doing things like building on it, putting solar farms, I don't have a problem with solar farms in certain areas, but I also don't believe that agrovoltaics are a solution unless we drastically change our food system and sheep production or sheep mutton becomes the meat of choice in the United States. It'll take a long time for those changes to happen. Next slide, please.
About 5 minutes, Tim.
Yes, sir. So my last slide, taking action now. What can we do? I think a lot of this is about educating farmers about opportunities to diversify their operations. We have a lot of farm diversification happening within the collar counties of Chicago. I think Kane and McHenry counties in particular, you see a lot of farm diversification. It's starting to happen here in Will County, which is a much more traditional farming system. But there are opportunities for farms and farmer markets. What I've seen in the city of Chicago is we had a community garden system grow into a community food system that's now really growing beyond that and becoming a regional food system. And I think, building the infrastructure to support and help those systems not only survive, but thrive and start to fill some of these voids in the market. I think making farmland preservation as important as any other conservation measure is important. Creating multi-state and multi-state strategic plans so that we are planning for the future of agriculture rather than it just happening. Right now, we have a lot of cattlemen from Texas that are buying land in Southwest Wisconsin. We have Napa grape growers buying land in Southwest Wisconsin to grow grapes, but there's no infrastructure to support any of those things. So states really need to plan for these changes. Just super one last thing, and I'll wrap up is water. Water is the one thing that we have to offer in the Great Lakes region that I think has the most value beyond our soil. And a lot of folks are buying land here because you don't have to buy water rights for the most part in the Great Lakes region. And I think that competition for and water rights are going to become a massive issue in the very near future. I will pause there and turn it over to Bob, and then I'll look forward to your questions afterwards.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Ted, Laura, you want to pull my slides up there? Unlike Tim, I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up in DuPage County, several generations removed from farming, kind of a vague pride in the in the farmland of Northeastern Illinois, but no real knowledge, nor about nature, I must admit. When I first got involved in this as an independent reporter in 1989, I was curious what happened to the prairies of my youth, too ignorant to realize they hadn't been prairies, they were cornfields. In order to understand how local governments fund themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But I became interested in figuring out how to stabilize agriculture in the face of suburban sprawl and urban disinvestment, et cetera. So I've been, as an independent reporter and consultant, I actually was drawn into farm financing policy, realizing you can't save all the land. We need to figure out how this works from an economic perspective. And in the last few years, I've been fortunate to work with Tim, Ted, and Laura and the others at Chicago Wilderness Alliance and the Growing with Ag Committee to develop an idea for a project. It's really been in design phase for many years, and it's coming now to ready to go to market with to get some funding to do to move this forward and to provide an entry point for all the various Chicago Wilderness Alliance groups to align themselves to address the challenge that Tim described. Next slide, please. My purpose today, I want to introduce three questions. A local farm economy. There actually is not a term for that. We think of local food, but that's really only a very popular market segment. Most of the land in the 7-county Northeastern Illinois region is in corn and soybeans. So I've been thinking for a long time, how do we figure out how to build common ground and then common cause? And what I'm really struck by is, again, the power of this alliance. There's a typo on regenerative ag. That's actually indicative of regenerative ag is not a well understood term. So that's to be defined. Why regenerative ag? Well, 7 governors have been pushing an airport down in Peotone. And I got to say, this is the first time the idea of a regenerative ag R&D center, this is the first time that there's ever been a concrete proposal for an alternative. I got to thank Tim for having coined the phrase. And the third thing is, how can Chicago Wilderness Alliance help? Well, it's just building out this Growing with Ag committee, enable the sort of a pathway for commercial scale agriculture to partner with what I think of as community-centered agriculture, all under the framing of nature conservation. Next slide, please. So I'm independent journalism and consulting brought me to assemble a team. I'm based in Evanston and figuring out how to help organizations navigate the intersection of food farming and regional economies. Next slide. These two drawings pretty well encapsulate the challenge that Chicago Wilderness faces, namely that our political economy, our real estate markets are organized around the idea that farmland on the edge of suburbs is a temporary land use. And to hell with what happens anywhere else. And municipalities are just trying to grab their property tax base. They're not really thinking through a lot of other things. And so on the left is a map that had appeared in there used to be a Springfield public policy magazine called Illinois Issues. And I wrote an article 30 years ago now about how the General Assembly had authorized the tollway to issue bonds to build a new beltway ring around 294. Now you notice the black line just west of O'Hare there, that's the I-355 DuPage County toll road, which was built in the 80s. And of this 75-mile dotted line, the only part that was actually been built is south of I-355, the DuPage County extension between 355 and I-80. But you'll notice back in 30 plus years ago, the vision was we'll build this massive beltway and all roads loop around to the site of Peotone International Airport, which was originally envisioned as an airport, I think, 3 times the size of O'Hare. Now, you may ask what was going on. At the time, the neighbors around O'Hare, Park Ridge, Elk Grove, Bensonville, they were trying to stop O'Hare expansion. The runway expansion that had since happened didn't work, so they partnered with a South Cook County Republican and began planning money in 1985. Jim Thompson was governor at the time when they began planning for the airport. By the late 90s, they had produced a body of quote unquote studies that basically tried to engineer consent for how wonderful this airport would be. And they were able to convince South Cook County Democrats to get on board. And suddenly what began as a way to stop O'Hare was turned into a racial justice issue to encourage the redevelopment of all of South Cook County. Now in 2002, they began to buy the land. It's only 7 square miles, like a fifth of the size of what was initially intended. And just as we know from the way real estate patterns work, that land, if an airport were to get built, what's much more likely to happen is there'll be quick money to be made by flipping real estate to the south of that airport, and South Cook County won't get any benefit. But there's been no discussion of all this, and that's been the hangup. So they've gone from a commercial passenger airport to a plan B, which is a cargo airport. And if we don't get our acts together between now and say January with an alternative plan, the General Assembly and the governor are going to be presented with a plan to turn that land into a cargo airport. Next slide, please. An early mentor for me in this work was a woman named Ann Hughes. She was the very first woman elected to be a county board chair in Northeastern Illinois. She had married into a McHenry County 5th generation farm family west of Woodstock and became knowledgeable at her own learning curve to get involved in elections. She ran for the school board. She said, no development west of Route 47. And she began to realize it's not so black and white. And what's striking from this comment that she made to me in a report I had written for USDA years ago is that she pretty well summarized the challenge that Chicago Wilderness Alliance faced way back at the beginning when the Alliance realized, look, 60%, as Ted pointed out, 60% of the land in that 4-state area is in agriculture. And God knows that the Kankakee River is a lot cleaner, through agricultural uses than the Des Plaines River. And we got to work with them, but it took a long time to figure out how to connect with them, because the conversation, well, we got to preserve the farmland. And I go back to, the idea of a local farm economy is just, it goes back to what Ann Hughes was thinking about. How do farmers, how can they supply a full range of markets? How can they also derive recurring revenue streams for the environmental benefits that society demands of them? 20 years ago, or 25 years ago now, farmers, ranchers, forest landowners were all saying, hey, if you want us to be environmental stewards, figure out how to pay us. And it turns out now there's this idea of an emerging ecosystem services market, and that becomes something that we need to figure out how to harness into this work. Next slide, please. So our regional planning agency, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, they are like their peers all around the country. Their main function is to distribute federal transportation dollars and enable local governments to prioritize where that money should go. CMAP has realized, this quote came from a 2018 report, and basically it was a prayer. Would some regional partner please figure out how all these groups work together? And so I think what's really clear now is that this Growing with Ag Committee, we can become the platform that strengthens agriculture systems on a variety of fronts. Next slide, please. Before the Chicago Wilderness Alliance had this committee, Growing with Ag Committee, the people I've been working with down in Will County, we have been aware that we need to work in a multi-state perspective, that the reason that the Peotone Airport has gone forward over all these years is because Springfield is just looking at Illinois. They're ignoring the fact that there's a Gary, Indiana airport. They're ignoring the fact that there's a Milwaukee airport. And so that's why long before I even connected up with Chicago Wilderness Alliance around this project, we recognize that 4-state area is the way to have the conversation. And what Tim's outlining about the coming changes over the next 25, 30 years, it's a really important framework. And so what we started with is I was working with conventional ag groups and built a bridge, Iroquois Valley, discovering that, they could work with these conventional groups. And there's a need for an agri-food nutrition conservation business plan that embeds these ecosystem service markets ideas into it. Next slide, please. My colleague, oh, that typo there, good food for all. Judy O'Gall, I've been working with her for 30 years. She is a member of the Will County Republican Party. I am a member of the Democratic Party of Evanston. And we discovered a long time ago, one of few things people can agree on. It's like people feeding themselves, people feeding their neighbors, local markets. And, how do we build this bridge to get agriculture working together? And we came upon, it was even during COVID, the idea of good food for all. Next slide, please. And what happened was Judy and I, she was talking about the lesson from COVID is that, there was a time when there was early in the pandemic, March, April of 2020, there were empty shelves, produce bins and meat counters, and it just sent this shock. It's like, what can counties do? Counties have this health and welfare safety function. What could counties be doing to encourage well-resourced complements to the global supply chain that can't be dependent on an emergency event? So her colleague on the Will County Board, Dan Butler, went to a meeting in Tampa a year ago and managed to convince 3,000 counties around the country, or elected officials from all 3,000 plus counties. Hey, yeah, good food for all. Neighboring counties need to work together to figure out how to do this. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I'd started with what Tim is describing is really, the term is like production agriculture, the agri-food industry. But what's happened in ways that I couldn't even imagine when I started in this field 30 years ago is the degree to which local food as a community builder, in this case as a human development engine and a community empowerment method. And so the Will County seat is Joliet, and I've been working with Deb Upshaw. She heads up a 30-year-old social service agency. They got some small grants to figure out how to do community gardens. And it's like, hey, kids will eat what they grow. You can't be well if you don't eat well. And it's just a message that's kind of lost. And so the trouble is that she's just in complete isolation. Go to the next slide, please. So I was thinking, like, what we need is to get a conversation, a dialogue process going. We have Joliet, people like Deb Upshaw doing, food, what I think of as food-oriented community reinvestment. They need to connect with better resource South Cook County, Southside Chicago groups in Englewood, Auburn, Gresham, and then down in Pembroke. And then we're able to, through the idea of a project, we get a dialogue process going through a number of components that I'll get to. And we present policymakers with alternatives. The people of Illinois should be demanding that policymakers consider something other than simply, well, we've always been wanting this airport. Next slide, please. And really the anchor for this, good food for all research triangle that can be the model for the National Association of Counties. They're waiting on us to get this going. On the south side of Chicago, there is an organization, Urban Growers Collective, and they've created this Green Era campus on a 9-acre brownfield site. And they're growing organic food to give away to neighbors. They now have built that building in the middle. There is an anaerobic digester where they're taking food waste and turning it into energy and turning it into fertilizer for organic farmers. And the governor showed up at an event 4 years ago to provide, it was like an initial $30 million. And he just said this line that strikes kind of should be what our mantra is. What's our 21st vision that deserves our investment for the entire Lake Michigan Basin region? And so the governor, they had an event just a couple of weeks ago, ribbon cutting ceremony. Now they're opening up an educational center. And again, Joliet doesn't have the kind of expertise. They don't have community development financial institutions that figure out how to raise the money to be able to address food desert issues in a more comprehensive way. Next slide, please. The third leg of that triangle, the third corner, is down in Pembroke Township, Kankakee. Johari Cole, she's an organic farmer. She was active. She made a presentation in Hammond at the Alliance's November Congress. Johari and I worked together as we were Governor Quinn appointees to an Illinois Local Food Farms and Jobs Council 15 years ago. the whole thing kind of imploded. Really, the central government wasn't the place to figure out how to decentralize the food system. And ever since, I've been saying to Johari, I'm trying to figure out a platform where she was actually president of the council. I'm trying to figure out a platform where she can maximize her impact. And one of the things that she has done, she started a community development corporation that's 2 years old. So they're just getting started. So this research triangle would wind up incorporating Joliet, Englewood, Pembroke, and how community development corporation can drive what I think of as food-oriented community reinvestment. Next slide, please.
About 5 minutes, Bob.
Okay. So what is the project that we're envisioning here is to use this committee as the steering committee. And there's like 4 project components that need to be advanced simultaneously. Number one is a media campaign. It's like people say, well, what's the one thing that we can do to change things? Well, basically give a platform for innovators anywhere in the agri-food, nutrition, and conservation space. Invite them to tell their story, what they need, and just build broad-based understanding for the success of this. Secondly, agri-food asset map. We need a regional agroeconomic framework, and my team is looking at how we could create the methodology to pinpoint the financial investment need. First of all, find out who's producing what they could be producing along the lines of what Tim described. Bring that into alignment with supply chain players. And then thirdly, community planning, where the Chicago Wilderness, Ted's identified 4 different teams that could all partner on coming up with an alternative plan for that project. Or I'm sorry, for that 7 square miles, but using that 7 square miles as a starting point to look at a much larger geography. First of all, in that 3-county area, then secondly, Northeastern Illinois, and then thirdly, within the 4-state region. And finally, come up with a comprehensive funding plan to move this forward. Next slide, please. So when I learned about the term regenerative agriculture, it was in 2024, the Rockefeller Foundation came out with a report. And they said that $4 trillion is the estimated cost of global crop and livestock losses over the last 30 years due to increasingly severe weather events. And they also said $4 trillion is the estimated annual global investment opportunity to accelerate agricultural adaptation to hotter and drier climates along the line of what Tim was describing. The trouble is that they say is there's very little understanding of what the term is. There's very little familiarity with anyone. So it's again, we need this geography, this 3-county area, to begin to unsort what regenerative ag can be and how it can drive, a new political economy in the United States and beyond. And I think the Alliance's climate plan for people and nature is just the entity to help do this. And just in closing, it's in 1968, I see we just elected a pope, so I think he's now the 7th pope. So in 1968, someone proposed an idea of a Peotone airport, and it made sense then. But it doesn't make sense now, and what really behooves us is to figure this thing forward so that we can turn this Peotone thing into a place where people learn, teach, experiment, grow, process, and sell food and other agricultural products for generations to come. With that, thanks, and open up the floor for questions or comments.
Thanks, Bob and Tim. There is actually one question already in the chat. Casey, do you want to come on the video and ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
I'll go ahead and read it. I will come off.
Okay. So Casey asks, historically, Chicago has at large has focused development west and northwest of Chicago with provision of Lake Michigan water to those areas. Not so for the south and southwest of Chicago. The Lake Michigan Compact has become more restrictive of extending Great Lakes water. So for both speakers, how will this region manage with climate change, land competition, and especially access to water?
So great question, Casey. And I'm not a water expert, but I would suggest 2 things. One is that because we're expecting actually more water in this region to come from climate change, we're not an area that depends on irrigation. Most of the time, the water that comes from normal weather patterns provides what we need. However, we have another opportunity, and that is most of the drainage system of Chicago all comes now to the south side. It comes down to South Holland to the quarries. And from there, it's then sent out to our river system. I imagine if we were to take that water, then brown water, and clean it to the level that is necessary for irrigation, and I'm thinking of indoor irrigation for indoor produced crops in the future, or crops that may be being produced at times. You know, we generally have a drought here in late July and early August. It's pretty common here in Illinois. There would be the opportunity to, rather than just simply put that water back into the system, to use that water for growing crops in the Southland.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Casey. Tuesday's Chicago Tribune had a page one story about how the city of Joliet has created a compact, and they are building, they were partnering with the city of Chicago on a $1 billion pipeline, which strikes me as a little bit odd. I remember when I was involved in fighting the I-355 toll road to Peotone, they said, well, growth will pay for itself. What seems that what we've done, given the current economic model, prevailing economic model, is that, well, you pave over the aquifer and you don't have water. So I think we need to figure out how to make the economics work. This ecosystem services market that certainly agri-food conglomerates are becoming interested in. We need to figure out how that works, but especially with community-centered agriculture as sort of an equal partner. But yeah, so it's just that's an ongoing conversation that really no one's really really addressing in any kind of comprehensive way. So that's why it's important that we move ahead on these ideas. John.
No, I lost your audio there, Ted. I think you're still on mute. Anyway, sorry for the dog in advance. Thank you very much, Tim and Bob. And, we've had a lot of side discussions on this. I am just curious, and I'm going to offer something at the end of my question. If there is a specific bill or sort of a nucleus of a bill that would promote local agriculture that could be introduced or was introduced in Springfield, or should it be more local than that? And Tim, whenever you want to do like a local ag summit at the Farm Foundation in Libertyville, I'm on board. I'll help you organize it.
All right, awesome.
Yes, I was working with folks at Open Lands earlier this year, and we approached Senator Rachel Ventura, a Democrat from Joliet, and she introduced a bill called the Agri-Food Infrastructure Investment Task Force Act. And in large part because there's no campaign to get behind the thing, it did not succeed. But I think the idea is we need to bring that back. We need to bring it back again. And be looking towards to introduce it in the January 2026 session.
And Bob, if there is a like a draft of a bill, let's talk about it. We could cobble together a pretty decent coalition. I know a lot of folks in Lake County who might be behind it, and some possible sponsors. I mean, that's how you really craft policy in Springfield. You start out with something like a task force, and they'll say, this is a good idea or not a good idea. But I think you got to build consensus slowly. It's really hard to push stuff, right out of the gate, but I'm happy to work on it.
Fantastic. We will be in touch.
Question from the chat from Lauren Collins. Lauren, I might have you come off mute and elaborate, please. But her question is, are the intentions to purchase or lease the land? And I assume this is to you, Bob, for the center, but Lauren, you want to clarify, please? Oh, she can't turn on her video or mic. So that's the question.
Yeah, I think that's to be determined. I mean, there's question number one for this regional agriculture task force conversation. We don't know. No one's ever presented anything. People say, oh, well, wasn't there federal money involved? Well, no, actually the state went ahead and bought up all that land with the FAA saying you don't have our approval. So it's to be determined.
the early research I did into that land as we were forming this idea was that the best use would be for the state to put it into a public trust, so that it would still be part of the state, but control of it would be given to a separate board that's not controlled by the legislature. So it would be kind of a public-private partnership, but that the land would be designated for agricultural production.
That's great news. I mean, and I've just been thinking all along that, this 7 square mile of land is due east of the Medewin tallgrass prairie. And if we're going to look at kind of a working lands kind of U.S. Climate Alliance perspective, it's about blending together permanently preserved land with a working landscape kind of model. That's a great idea.
Lauren, I'll get to your follow-up in a second. Kristen Scott asks, you say that this needs to happen prior to January 2026. Can you help me understand the urgency?
Well, what's happened in the last 3 years, the General Assembly approved bills, to my understanding, that the Governor Pritzker did not bring to them, but basically saying, directing IDOT to, first of all, put together a request for qualifications to determine whether there's a cargo airport, a private developer who would want to develop the project. And one of the reasons that Ventura's bill didn't get assigned to a committee is she was told that the proponents are in conversation with a cargo developer. So I would expect that they'll be bringing forward a proposal and introducing it in the January 2026 session.
We only have a couple minutes left here. So I think I'm going to read Casey's follow-up comment, and then I will respond to Lauren's additional remark, and then close us out. So Casey says, a comment was given stating how development pays for itself. Well, that is not true. It's a nuance that the public does not understand. Preservation of farmland has been championed by the American Farmland Trust for decades now. How can we get politicians, and I suppose local municipalities, to understand that development does not pay for itself, but instead creates more cost?
That's part of what we do through a public information campaign, begin to elevate all these issues, give reason for, is John up in Lake County, again, we just elevate these issues and advance public information, agri-food, asset mapping, come up with a plan for what that 7 square miles could become, and then come up with a financing plan to support it all.
Land is not infinite, and we've lived with that belief that farmland is simply land that's been waiting to be developed for decades now. That is no longer the case, and land is going to become increasingly harder to come by. And the value of land and the value of rural communities and the value of things produced on that land is only going to increase. And either the elected officials are going to catch on to that, or they're going to get caught off guard. But that is our very near future. That rural communities are not this dying ember of a former civilization. They're the beginning of our future civilization.
Claire, I see you have your hand. We're closing out. Is this a real quick question?
Yeah, so I'll just go very quick. I just wanted to say, like you mentioned, the American Farmland Trust, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Midwest Policy Manager for American Farmland Trust, and I've said this to Bob, but very happy to help on policy, very happy to help on communications. Just need to figure out where that happens, but yeah, we're very on board just wherever it makes sense.
So Claire, thank you for parking lot and tabling that comment. We are looking to have a follow-up discussion on this cafe on May 20th, I believe. Laura has put the notice for this in the chat. So please
June
do
20th.
join us for
Yep.
follow-up. Sorry, June 20th, not May 20th. And so please do join us for that if you're still interested in this conversation. We are very interested in moving these things forward in terms of Tim's sort of Midwest master plan for farming, and then Bob's more scale specific idea for a quality of life plan for Will County for small farmers to get this stuff going. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you can continue to join us for this conversation. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I did want to also add the PDF of the slides and a recording will be sent out to everyone who registered for the meeting, along with an invitation for a registration link for this next meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
I have
thanks.
to hop to a 1 o'clock, but that was good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Excellent. We will
Thank
get the materials processed.
Great. All right.
Bye.
Take care.